We're now on the top of Daf Lamed Aleph Amid Beis, and we're up to Ella Omar Abaye. Abaye is explaining why the Mishnah did not give the case of Safek Gerushin where he threw a get, and it was Safek Karav Lo, Safek Karav Lo. And as we discussed at great length, this was the get that was given to the erva of Reuven by Shimon. Shimon has a wife named Rivka, plus a wife named Sarah. Rivka is an erva to Reuven, and before his death, Shimon gave a get, which was a Safek Gerushin, to his wife Rivka the erva. Why wouldn't the Mishnah give that as a case of Safek Gerushin, which would parallel in a symmetrical way the case of Kedushin in the Reisha, a Safek Kedushin, which is Safek Karav Lo, Karav Lo. And we had suggested one answer, that was Rabba's answer, but we left it that Abai could not, he could not maintain that answer. So Abai gives an alternative answer, Yagid Olav Reo. And this is a pasuk in Eov, and Tana Kiddushin V'hu Adin Gerushin. So Yagid Olav Reo means like one friend reveals about the other friend, sheds a light on the other friend. So we're going to learn the din of Gerushin from the din that's right near it is Kiddushin. And if Shimon had given a Safek Kiddushin, Safek Karav Lo, Safek Karav Lo to the erva Rivka, then the same case is Hu Adin L'Gerushin, that Shimon gave a get to Rivka the erva, and it was Safek Karav Lo, Safek Karav Lo. And the same thing applies of Choletzes V'lo Misyaberes vis-a-vis Sarah, when Sarah falls to Yibam to Reuven. So therefore, according to Abai's interpretation, the Tana had no need to explicitly repeat that which he already spelled out in the Reisha in the case of Kedushin, because Magid L'cha Yagid Olav Reo that we know from Kedushin Gerushin. Is Tana B'Gerushin, it would apply the same thing in Gerushin. Now we work it the other way around. From the Sefer of Safek Gerushin, we're going to shed a light on the Reish of Safek Kedushin. Tana B'Gerushin, V'hu Adin L'Kedushin. In Gerushin, we had three scenarios of a get that was possible midrabanan, whether it was Kosav, B'Ksav Yoda below Eidim, whether there was no Zman in the get, or there was only one Eid and the Ksav Sofer. And in all those cases, Choletzes V'lo Misyabemes, because the get is possibly Divrayim, and Hu Adin B'Kedushin, if Shimon gave Rivka a Kedushin, Rivka is the erva, and in the Star Kedushin, it was either with Ksav Yoda without Eidim, it was Ein Bozman, it was Chasam Olav Rak Beid Echad, then the law would be Choletzes V'lo Misyabemes. Amalei Rava turns to Abai, he says, if you're correct, Yagid Olav Reo, then my Zehu Diktani. Why did the Tana, in the case of Safek Kiddushin, use the language Zehu Safek Kiddushin? And later on, in the Sefer with regard to Gerushin and Safek Gerushin, again, use the words Zehu Safek Gerushin. It would seem from the language that the Mishnah, the Tana of Mishnah employed, that it's coming to exclude any other case other than these scenarios, and saying this is the scenario. Only in this case of Safek Kedushin is the din Choletzes V'lo Misabemes, and so only in this case of Gerushin. And there's no other possibility of a Safek Gerushin for Chalitza without Yibum. And according to Abaye, that's not true, because that which it says in the scenario of Kedushin applies to Gerushin and vice versa. So therefore, why does the Tana use these specific scenarios and add the word Zeh? Therefore, Rava rejects Abaye and offers an alternative interpretation as to why, in the case of Safek Gerushin, Safek Karavlo, Saka Karavla is omitted from the Mishnah. Ela Marava Kol Sheyesh Bekiddushin Yesh Begerushin. But Begerushin is Masha Ein Zeh B'Safek Kiddushin. So Rava says the following: all of the different cases and scenarios of Safek Kiddushin, which in this case means Safek Karavlo, Safek Karavla, they apply even to Safek Gerushin. And therefore, if the get was given by Shimon to Rivka in a Safek, similar to the Safek of Kiddushin, Karavla, Karavlo, then the din would be Choletzes V'lo Misyabemis. However, in Gerushin, the Mishnah wants to tell us that there are cases in Safek Gerushin which generate the law of Choletzes V'lo Misyabemis that have no parallel in Kiddushin. Meaning, if Shimon were to reach out to Rivka, who's the Erev to Reuven, with a Shtar Kiddushin that has a Chash, such that in a parallel case of get, it would be Choletzes V'lo Misyabemis. In Kiddushin, the halacha is going to be Muteres L'shuk below Chalitza. She does not need Chalitza. And the Shtar Kiddushin to the Erva, in this case to Rivka, is valid and makes therefore Sarah into a Tzaras Erva who's Muteres L'shuk in such a situation, even on a Darabanan level. And the Gemara is going to explain in which of the cases of the three scenarios that are mentioned in the Mishnah by get with a Psul D'Rabbanan, which of them would not apply in the case of a Shtar Kiddushin. And hence, according to Rava, just on a structural level, Zehu, the word Zehu that the Tana used to Begerushin, Lav Dafka. Ela Mishum de Tani Zehu Bekiddushin, Tani Nami Zehu Begerushin. So the Zehu and a Gerushin in the Sefer is only to maintain the symmetry and the mirror image of the language of the Rachel. But in the Rachel, with regard to Kiddushin, the Zehu is very much justified because it's coming to Lafuki, one of the various scenarios in Gerushin, which would not have a parallel in Kiddushin. And that would mean that in the case of Kiddushin, in that particular scenario, which we'll focus on immediately, the Shtar Kiddushin would be valid. There would be no Psul D'Rabbanan. Hence, Sarah becomes a Tzaras Erva, and she's Yotzeis Lashuk below Chalitza. So the Gemara says, what case of the three scenarios that are mentioned in Gerushin that created a Safek Psul, or let's call it a Psul D'Rabbanan, would, in the case of Kiddushin, not generate a Psul even Midrabbanan? And the Gemara says, Lemutei Zman. And now we're about to enter into a sugya of Zman, which is a requirement in a get Gerushin, and has no parallel in a Shtar Kiddushin. We're going to have to ask two questions. Question number one, why did the Rabbanan require a Zman in a get? And question number two, why did they not require a Zman for the same reason in Shtar Kiddushin? So again, just understand the structure of the Lekabah Kiddushin. If a Shtar Kiddushin would be missing Zman, it would be kosher even Rabbanan. And therefore, in that case of a Shtar Kiddushin without Zman, clearly the marriage between Yaakov and Rivka is absolutely valid, even in the absence of Zman in the Shtar Kiddushin. Hence, Sarah is a Tzaras Erva, and she's Yotzeis below Chalitza. Now, the Gemara in Gittin, which is now being summarized here in our Sugya Daf Lamed Aleph on the Beis and Yevamot, tells us that there are two explanations, two approaches between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish as to why, in a Gerushin situation, in a Shtar get, the Rabbanan instituted a requirement of Zman. Rabbi Yochanan has the svara of Shelo Yechap al Bas HaChoso, that if a man marries his niece, meaning his sister's daughter, he has a very special relationship to her, and above and beyond the marriage relationship, he's very concerned as to the welfare of his niece. And if chas v'shalom, heaven forbid, she had a maisus nus during his marriage, if there's no zman in the get, he could give her a get. And if the Adam come to testify on her maisus nus, he could save her life by predating the get, or at least claiming that the get was given before the maisus nus. And that would save her from being condemned to a death penalty. Reish Lakish says that the reason why the Rabbanan instituted a requirement of Zman in Kiddushin is so that a woman would not lose her nichse malug if, let's say, the husband consumed the nichse malug, the possessions of his wife, after the get was given, which means that he basically stole from his wife, or his ex-wife, you could say, and therefore they required a zman, so we know exactly which consumption of nechasim of hers the Baal would have to pay for. Why do these logical reasons not apply? Neither Rabbi Yochanan Shemi Yechapa, nor Reish Lakish's Shelo Tafsid Isha Peres Nichsamulug. Why don't they apply to Kishtar Kedushin? I can tell you. Leman Yomar, according to Reish Lakish Mishum Peri, that the reason why a Zman in Gerushin was instituted as a requirement is that the Baal should not be able to be mafsid Peros of Nichse Maluk, which he ate up and consumed already after the get. Again, I'm not getting into the details here, what it means after the get was written, after the get was delivered. And the answer is that Rusa, when a man is marrying a woman, lesle peri. The halacha is that a Baal is zocha b'peres nichse malug only after Nesuin, not during Eris. She still belongs to Beis Aviyah. She's not in his domain. Therefore, if they don't write a Zman in a Shtar Kedushin, the woman will not lose anything because there's no Hefseid Peres Nichse Maluk. He doesn't even have rights to the Peres Nichse Maluk that he can cheat her and say, well, I took it before this date. But Elamandim according to Rabbi Yochanan, Mishum Basachoso is Liskain Zman. Even in Shtar Kedushin, we need Basachoso. Why? Because if a woman would be Mizana after the Kedushin, he's going to change the date, so to speak, and post-date it in such a way that the Znus took place before the Kedushin. He's going to play around and assume that he hadn't married her yet, and she had this Maisis Znus. The Gemara answers, in a case of Gerushin, there's only one method of achieving a get, and that's through a shtar, through a get. But in contrast, with regard to Kedushin, you have the method of shtar, and you have the method of kesef. In the case of kesef, obviously he could be mechapal basal choso, and he could claim that she was married later than the znus, and she wasn't married at the time of the znus. And Zman is not going to have any bearing on kesef. And therefore, since in the case of Makadosh b'kesef, there's no Zman, therefore they weren't misaken a requirement of Zman b'shtar. And basically, he can be Makadosh b'kesef, and he'll be able to be Mechapal Basachos, claiming that the kesef was given to her after the znus. So Gemara raises the following objection. What about the case of Shtar Shechur Shel Eved the Ika de Kani B'Kaspa? The Ika de Kani B'Shtara, an Eved could free himself, buy himself out, and be V'Shachar himself either with Kesef or by receiving a Shtar. And nevertheless, Tikkun Rabbanan Zman, there is a requirement of Zman in a Shtar Shechur Shel Eved in order to know at what point this Eved becomes also b'shivcha, and he's allowed to marry Bas Chorin. And they weren't inhibited to prevent this takana of Zman, requiring a Zman and Shtar Shichrur, just because the Eved has another option of being Meshachar himself through Kesef, of buying his way out. So the same thing should apply to Kedushin. Even though there are those who are Makadish with Kesef, it doesn't matter. We should make a takana to include Zman and Shtar Kedushin for those who are Makadish with Shtar. The Gemara answers, Hasam Ruba B'Shtara, Hacha Ruba B'Kaspa. The first answer to the Gemara is that we go Basar Rov. And they're not going to make a takana in a case where it's Ruba de Kaspa. In Kedushin, most people marry a woman with Kesef. They're not going to establish a new takana of Zman B'Shtar Kedushin just for the miyut of people who utilize that method of Shtar Kedushin, when most people will utilize Kesef. Let's go over this last answer once more, because Rashi interprets that the Gemara is trying to differentiate between a Shtar Kedushin and a Shtar Shichrur Shel Eved. And the word Hasam is referring to a Shtar Shichrur Shel Eved and Ruba B'Shtara. And since Ruba B'Shtara, we have to know exactly when he became a Ben Chorin. Therefore, they established a requirement to Zman B'Shtara. But in the case of Kedushin, most people utilize the method of Kesef, where Zman is irrelevant. Therefore, they didn't even establish the requirement of Zman in the case of a Shtar Kedushin. If you want to give you another explanation, alternative, as to why they didn't establish a requirement of Zman in a Shtar Kedushin, Mishum Delo Efshar. And now the Gemara is going to embark on a long analysis as to why the takana of Zman would not be meaningful and protect and prevent Shema Yechapal Basachosa. Why? Heichiav. What are we going to do over here if we establish the requirement of a Zman in a Shtar Kedushin and try to prevent Shema Yechapal Basachosa? Linche Gabi Dida, if the Shtar Kedushin will remain in the possession of the Miskadeshes, then Mochakala, if she had a Znus relationship, she'll erase the Zman in the Shtar, claiming that her Maises Znus took place before the Kedushin. She'll gain absolutely nothing by adding Zman. She'll just cut it out. And if you leave the Shtar Kedushin in the possession of the Baal, once again, Zimnin Devas Achosohi, if he wants to mechaper on his niece, who actually was Mizana after the Kedushin, then umechaper olive. Once again, if the Shtar Kedushin is possession, he gained nothing by writing the Zman. He'll erase the Zman in order to mechaper and save his niece from being condemned to death in Bezdin by saying that, in fact, Shaznus that the Adam testified about took place before the Shtar Kedushin was given. Third possibility that we're going to reject. Linche Gabi Eden. Why not just leave the Shtar in the hands of the Eden? Now the Eden will bring the Shtar to Bezdin when it's necessary. And if the Shtar will be in the hands of the possession of the Eden, then L'chora, the Zman is very meaningful. The Eden will be able to testify exactly when this Znus took place, and no one's going to be able to Mechapal Basachos and fool around with the date, and the Eden for sure are not going to fool around with the date. So the Gemara says, what's your case exactly? Edis Chiri, if the Eden remember exactly when the Shtar was written and given, Leisu V'Lisod. I don't have to add a Zman, let the Eden count. V'lo, but if on the other hand, you want to write a Zman in the Shtar Kedushin in order to cover yourself for a scenario in which the Eidim did not remember on their own exactly when the Shtar was written, and therefore you want to rely on the Shtar itself, that's a very dangerous situation. Imnin de Chazu Miksava, perhaps the Eidim will see what was written in the Shtar, and they're signed on that Shtar. The asu mishade, they don't remember the date on the shtar. They only saw it and they're testifying based on what is written in the shtar. Because Rachmana Omar mipiyam v'lo mipiyam. This would be a psul in edus, in which the edus is based not on what the edim know and remember, but rather on what they saw in the ksav. So therefore, once again, writing the zman in the shtar kedushin is not going to be meaningful. It's not going to be successful or significant. If the edim remember the zman, then you don't have to write it in the shtar. But otherwise, you want to write and record the zman in the shtar, because perhaps the Eidim will forget the Zman. Well, if the Eidim forget the Zman, then we should not be leaving the shtar in the hands of the Eidim, because that would be a very precarious situation in which we might have a psul. I mean, people will be so. Why not say that the Zman in the get is also not going to be meaningful and successful in preventing Shemi Yechafa Basachoso for all the reasons above, and therefore there's no purpose and no goal achieved by writing the Zman in the get. And if the Baal and the Isha want to be Mechaper, then they can simply erase the Zman from the get. The Gemara answers, Hasam Latzola Didaka Asi. Hacha Lechova Didaka Asi. It's a Hatzola Didah for the Edus to be registered that she was already a Grusha at the time of this Nus, and she was no longer an HSH. And therefore, the chashash of Shevet Timchok, that maybe he or she will erase the Zman, is no longer a chashash. Why? Because if Adam testified that she was Mizana, if she doesn't have a raya that the Gerushin took place before this Nus, then the Chazaka tells me that she was married at the time of this Nus, and Bezdin will put her to death. She has a Cheskes Shesish and guilty until proven innocent. She would have to prove that she was already divorced at that time that she had this Nus. So therefore, if the Chachamim would not establish the requirement of writing a Zman in the get, then in the absence of the Zman in the get, he would be able to be Mechapol Misafek, and he would be able to say that at the time of this Nus, she was already divorced. And again, keep in mind, there's no vested interest here to erase this man, because if they erase this man and Adam testify this Nus, she's in deep trouble because of a Cheskes Shesish. In contrast, with regard to a Shtar Kedushin, Lechova Didaka Asi, it's coming to testify that she is an HSH, and it's not going to be meaningful or successful to be Masakin writing as man in a Shtar Kedushin, because in event that she does implement a Mises Nus, there'll be a movement to hide the Shtar. They're not going to bring it out at all. They don't want to claim that she's an HSH and prove that with Kedushin. That would be the worst thing in her favor. Or they'll erase the Zman in order to save her from Misa. And her chazaka is that she's a Pnuya. It's only the Zman that might make her guilty of being an HSH, the Zman on the Shtar Kedushin, and they'll erase that. And therefore, they didn't make a takana of Zman in the Shtar Kedushin as they did in the Shtar Ger. This leads us to the Mishnah on the bottom of Daf Lamed Aleph Amud Beis. Shlosha achim nesuin shalosh nachios. So we have a case where Reuven marries Sarah, and Shimon marries Rivka. Levi marries Rachel. Masechet and Reuven dies, and his wife Sarah falls for Yibum to Shimon and Levi. The Asaba and Shimon Hasheni did a Maimar, meaning Kiddushay Kesef Kiddushay Shtar, in Sarah, Ashes, Reuven, the Yevamot who fell for Yibum. Umeis, now Shimon also dies. And now the wives of both Reuven and Shimon fall for Yibum to Levi. So Sarah, who was Ashes Reuven, as well as Rivka, who was Eshet Shimon, the two of them fall for Yibum to Levi. Why is that? And this is going to be the halacha of Zikas Shnei Yevamot. We have one woman who has a Zika for Yibum from two different husbands. And the drasha is that mitzvah Yibum only applies in a case of Yavo Oleho, which means Yesh Oleh Zikas Yavam Echad. Velo, to exclusion of a Yavama, Sheyesh Oleh Zikas Shnei Yevamot. Now, Sarah, as a result of the mimer of Shimon, was this Kadshal Shimon. And that creates a Zika that is projected from Shimon to Levi because of Shimon's marriage relationship to Sarah. Now, in addition, Sarah's status is that she has a Zika from Reuven. She was Ashes Reuven, and that Zika to Reuven with the death of Reuven was never was never removed. And now she has another Zika from Shimon, who was Makadisha. Therefore, Levi is Choletzes for Einu Misyabemis. Now, exactly what about the other wife who fell for Yibum, which was, who do we call her? Shimon was married to Rivka. So, I mean, we've been focusing on Sarah now. What about Rivka? The Gemara is going to try to explain why Rivka doesn't have possibility of Yibum. Rabbi Shimon disagrees with Tanakama, Omer. He's of the opinion that Levi is miyabem li'ezo shiyirtze. Because Rabbi Shimon has a suffix, he vacillates about the status of Maimer and Yevama, whether it's Kona, Kinyan, Gomer, or Lo. Therefore, if Maimer is Kona, then Eshes ha'ach harishon, Sarah, the wife of Reuven, who was this Kadsha to Shimon, is considered the wife of Shimon on the side that Maimer is Conan, a Kinyan Gomer. And therefore he could be Miyabim. Levi could be Miyabim, because now there are two wives that are coming and being projected from Shimon. If on the other hand, Maimer is not Conan, then he could be Miyabim. Ashes Achiv Harishon, he could be Miyabim Sarah, because the Maimer is not Kona. She was never Knuya to Shimon. So we don't have Ashes Shnei Yevamot. Now, after he's Miyabim, Levi's Miyabim, one of these two ladies, Choletz Lishniya. That means that since there's a suffix whether Maimer is Kona Kinyan Gomer or not, so we suffix on the side that it's not Kona Kinyan Gomer, then Eshes Ha'ach HaRishon, meaning Sarah, is not Mekudeshes to Shimon, and therefore Eshes Ha'ach HaSheni Zkuka L'Chalitza. Now the Gemara in Gittin on Daf Pei Beis establishes that Isha Achas could be married to two men. How is that so? So this is called the sugi of Shir Beget. Reuven was Makadish Isha, and he made a Tanai in the Kedushin, Chutz Shimon, that these Kedushin, these Makadishar, should not generate an Isar onto Shimon. He leaves Shimon out of the rest of the world. And now Shimon has a little petach, a little extra room, and he was Makadish. So now both Kedushin are Chal, the Kedushin of Reuven, as well as the Kedushin of Shimon. Because Reuven, when he was Makadish, this woman, he said, Chutz mi Shimon. Now Shimon was Makadish Astam. So the din is that both Kedushin are Chalim, and she's considered Esha Shneya. If both die, then there won't be any Yibum in our Torah, because that's already the exclusion that we had in that Mishnah of Zika Shnei Yevamot. So the Gemara raises the following question. according to the Tanakama, holds that Shtein Cholzos, Velo Misyabmos, Ve'izika Shnei Yevamot Doraisa, Chalitza Nami Lo Tiboy. If we're holding that Maimer is Konen in Yevama, Kinyan Gomur, according to Tanakama of Shimon and our Mishnah, then she has a Zika Shnei Yevamot. And therefore, on a Deraisa level, there's no mitzvah of Yibum, and hence there's no Zika to Shnei Yevamot. And she shouldn't even require Chalitza. The Torah is mafkia her completely from the Parsha of Yibum. Why does the Tana say stay in Cholzos? As I state in the Mishnah. Stay Arei Elu stay on Noshim Cholzos. And the Gemara answers, Ella Midrabban. We're going to have to assume that this drasha is not a drasha Gemura to exclude Zika Shnei Yevamot, but what prevents the Yibum of these two women, in the case of Zika Shnei Yevamot, is since Doraisa Maimar is not Kona B'Yevama, then both of these ladies are Ru'uyas L'Syabim in Torah. And therefore, the only reason why we block Yibum is only Midrabanim Gzeira, based on Gzeira of Shema Yomu Shtei Yevamas Habos Mi Bais Echad, which means if Reuven and Shimon are brothers, and Shimon marries both Sarah and Rivka, now Shimon dies, and his two wives, Sarah and Rivka, fall for Yibum to Reuven. Is Misyabmos? There should be a Yibum halacha for both of them, for both of Shimon's wives, Sarah and Rivka. And yet, on a Torah level, Asur Lishteim Lisyamin. Why? Because Bayis Echadu Bona V'lo Shnei Bat. So we have to be afraid in our Mishnah of Gzeira because I'll confuse it with the case of Shtei Yevamas Habos Mi Bayis Echad. And here in our Mishnah, where there was a Maimar in which Shimon did a Maimar in H.S. Reuven, then even though Midoraisa, the Yevama that received a Maimar, which is Kedushin, is not a Ishto. She's not really married to him because the Torah, in a case of Zikas, even doesn't recognize Maimar. So these are Shtei Yevamas Habos Mi Shtei Bater. And there should be, on a Deraisa level, a Yibum for both of them. But nevertheless, it looks like Shtei Yevamos Habos Mi Bayis Echad. So they made a Gzeira that there shouldn't be a Yibum of Shtein, Atu, because they might confuse it with the case of Shtei Yevamos Habos Mi Bayis Echad. So the Gemara asks, why then do they both require Chalitza from Levi? V'niyabim l'chada, v'nichlotz l'chada. Why doesn't Levi have the option of being niyabim one of these two Yevamos and give Chalitza to the other one? Because in Shtei Yevamos Habos Mi Bayis Echad, there's no Isser unless there's Shtei Misyabemes. But if one is Misyabemes and the other gets Chalitza, there's no Isser B'Dover. So why was the Tana so machmer in these Yevamos, more than in the case of Shtei Yevamos Bos Mi Bayis Echad, and made it clear that both of them have to have Chalitza? There's not even an option of Yibum to one of them. And the Gemara answers, Zera Shema Yomru Bayis Echad Miktsaso Banui. Here we turn to Daf Lamed Beis. Umiktsaso Cholitz. They're going to say that you're allowed to be miyabem one and give chalitza to the other. And according to the strict letter of the law, she doesn't need chalitza. So they're going to think that no, she needs chalitza. And now the Gemara is going to analyze what's so terrible if they think that she needs chalitza. What's the downside of that? And then Amir Hashem will be for the daf of tomorrow. So let me take this opportunity to wish you a great day, and thank you very much.